Hello, and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, the podcast where modern cultivation meets science and sustainability. I'm Dr. Russell Sharp, the inventor of gold leaf fertilizer, or as it's called in the UK, liquid gold. And today we're talking about something quite golden. We're talking about variegation, the sort of lush, streaky, speckled growth you get on leaves that it's not green, it could be white, could be yellow, could be golden. This is called variegation. Some people call it albino growth, but it's variegation is what most people call it. So many people want variegated plants because they are collectible, they are interesting to look at. Some people consider them vulgar. And in sort of like gardening, outdoor gardening, many variegated plants are sort of shunned because they're considered a bit tacky. Whereas in houseplants, now since COVID, variegated forms are very expensive. We've got a variegated Swiss cheese plant, Monstera deliciosa, in our office, and it's, we could sell it for hundreds of pounds because it's so rare and variegated form. And so it's a really interesting topic. It's of interest to many different sectors of hydroponics, especially ornamental plants. In plants that are grown for food, normally variegation is not wanted because all of the variegated tissue that isn't green is not photosynthesizing, and so it's wasted plant material, and so you'll get far lower photosynthetic rates in variegated plants. We have a standard, what we call in science, wild type Monstera plant in the office, and that grows a lot faster than the variegated form. And there's also suffers a lot less stress. So if you're growing a crop that doesn't rely on it being variegated, best to avoid variegated forms. They can be unusual, interesting to look at, but they're not going to grow anywhere near as fast. So we're going to look at all the different causes of variegation, see if they're stable and how you can propagate these plants, because if they can be very expensive, then they can be propagated. So as we said, the Monstera deliciosa was a very expensive form. There's also more common varieties that are less looked upon as being hip and in at the moment, like spider plant. Spider plant is not, you can command hundreds of pounds for a spider plant. And in fact, if you look at a spider plant and you've been in horticulture for a while, it's reminiscent of like 1970s houses and old sort of horticultural books from back then. An interesting side note, spider plant it's got the world's worst Latin name or scientific name. Its genus is Chlorophytum, which means green leaf, which is hardly unusual for plants. And also, it doesn't have green leaves, it has variegated leaves. I think I've said this before. So stupid plant, really. Other variegated plants that I really like are dawn redwood. You can get completely albino versions of dawn redwood. So I think that might be like a developmental mistake or even a mutation. And they can sprout up and they live solely on the energy supplied by the mother plant. And they can grow up to like 12 meters tall, I'm told. Anyone in sort of Humboldt County, any Northern Californian growers have ever seen a albino redwood, I'd love to see a picture of it because they sound amazing. Like imagine an albino Christmas tree, completely white. That would be really cool. So no green material at all, whereas variegation, normally there's some green material. So what is variegation and why is it happening? It's obviously difference in colours between the plant foliage. The key factor is chlorophyll. So it may be that they lack all pigments altogether, in which case they'll be white or cream. And then there might be when the chlorophyll disappears, there might be other underlying pigments. So there might be orange or purples coming through. It can be caused by genetic variation, so genetic mutation, so in the DNA of the plants, and that can be passed through to the seeds. So these tend to show consistency in the patterns across generations. So spider plant would be a good example of that. Calanthea is another good example. Lots of calantheas. They're a tropical houseplant that come from the Amazon rainforest. Coleus hybrids, they're another very common houseplant. In legal cannabis, true stable genetic variegation is very, very rare, and generally it's bred out due to the reduced photosynthesis. It's not a one that improves yield. However, if you could produce a plant that had variegated buds, but not leaves, then you would probably be onto a massive, massive winner, because you would need far less curing because there's no chlorophyll. People smoke cannabis, legal cannabis, and the harshness comes from the chlorophyll, not from any of the other chemicals in it. So if you could produce a bud that was variegated only in the bud and not in the leaves, you'd be onto a winner. So very hard to inbreed that plant though, because it's dioecious, produces male and female plants, whereas other plants it is. And a mutation as well, when it's due to a single mutation, it's very hard to breed that mutation in and keep it stable. Normally the wild type shows up in the progeny, the daughter plants. You can get something called chimeral variegation, and we're going to talk about chimeras in another episode because they're really, really interesting. They're one of the most interesting things about plant science, in my opinion. If you know what chimera is, it's like two separate organisms that their cells have been intertwined together. So don't think of chimeras. If you look it up, you might see something about ancient Greek gods or monsters where there's like half a horse and half a lion or something like that. This is very different. This is where the cells of two completely different organisms intertwine, and then so you might have two cell lines of the same plant intertwined, and so you have the albino version and the wild type green version, and together they produce a variegated plant. So those distinct cells, genetic distinct cells, are living side by side, and that can lead to dramatic stripes or splits in colours on the leaves. Think of white and green. Pothos or monsters apparently are due to chimeral variegation. Propagation tip: chimeral variegation can be maintained by cuttings, but not by seed, because obviously it's only one type of genetic line can come through in the seed, because the pollen is transferring single pollen cells and chromosomes through to the mother plant. So chimeras, they are purely by cuttings. Okay, so they won't preserve the pattern. There's viral variegation caused by infection. These are usually not desirable. You'll see mosaic or mottle patterns, yellow-green patterns, but you get them. They come along with stunted growth because it's a virus, and weak plants. If any of your plants start to show symptoms of viruses, best to isolate and then discard, burn them, to prevent the spread. Just get rid of them, really. Viral variegation was also very common in tulips. Before people knew what the cause was and knew about genetics and how things were transferred, you could actually, in Holland, during tulip mania, often viral variegations were sold for a high premium, and then the virus would either harm the tulips or would grow out, and they would actually be cured of their virus variegation and stuff like that. So very rare that a virus variegation is wanted, but in tulips it was actually seen as a potential novel tulip. And then if you know anything about tulip mania, it's a great example of how like stock markets, but all types of markets can go boom and bust, sort of Beanie Babies, the price for things skyrockets, and then as soon as they become in high demand, the supply starts to come back and the price drops dramatically and crashes. The tulip mania is the classic example, and it's taught in all business schools. And the price of one tulip bulb sold for the same amount as one house in Amsterdam. That's sort of crazy levels. Fourth type of variegation: environmental or nutritional variegation. Temporary or stress-induced deficiency like magnesium or iron might cause interveinal chlorosis. Too much light can bleach certain leaves, so they're not true variegation. And then there is another type of variegation I once read about where it's actually, the plants look like they've got no chlorophyll, but it's because the light's being reflected back from the leaves. So like silvery leaves can look variegated because the light's coming back, because plants on sand dunes and places like that where they receive extremely high light levels actually don't want all the light, so they bounce a bit back and it makes it look variegated. So we said it can show, often it's shown up as genetics or environmental stress, reduced growth, slower growth, lower yields. Can look cool, but it's not a phenotype you're normally looking for. How do you care for variegated plants if it is something that you're looking for? Well, the light is critical. And one thing you won't see often is watering is critical, because the light, the leaf temperature and the water all play in together to each other. And if the leaf temperature rises too much, they'll scorch really, really easily. Far, far easier than a green leaf will scorch, because when plants photosynthesize, they're mopping up the light and the damage that light does inside the cells. And if you don't have the chlorophyll there to mop up all these things called free radicals, these molecules that sort of cause damage, like in humans it causes cancer, if you don't have the antioxidizing ability of photosynthesis, then you're going to cause so much damage that the cells will die. When the cells die, that will, on a large scale, that's scorch. So light levels need to be kept low. Watering needs to be kept well, really, good water in your grow media, because as soon as you reduce watering, the stomata close and the leaf temperature rises up. And again, high temperatures, that's going to cause scorch again. So that's really critical, because variegated plants, you can't sell a scorched plant. So you might have the most wonderful variegated plant, but it will scorch. And then philodendron, they're related to monsters. They're all in the same family. If you don't give them enough light, they'll actually go from variegated back to green, because they sort of revert to full green. So it's a delicate balancing act. That's one of the reasons they command such high price, because no idiot can do it. You have to have at least some knowledge. You have to be able to, feed yourself. To do this, you have to be able to study and get your environment dialed in. So plants can revert back to green if you don't give them enough light, and they will scorch if you give them too much. Nutrients need to be kept consistent, especially magnesium and nitrogen. Pruning, if your variegated plant starts reverting, growing full green leaves, you prune those off and encourage the variegated form. You see this a lot on trees. Variegated trees don't look the best variegated trees, but some people like them. Variegated maples, people who haven't cut off the reverted material, and so you get a tree that looks half variegated, half not. And then cloning. So making sure if it is a variegation that's non-genetic, it's a chimera or something that's not going to be stable when in the seed, then make sure you take clones, cuttings, layering, things like that. So closing thoughts, variegation adds a dash of surprise and beauty, especially in hydroponics, where there's often not much in the way of colour, but it does add complexity. So if you're a collector looking for a clone to, wow your fellow growers, then it can certainly be something you can have in your garden, your grow room, and people will take note and think that you're a great grower if you're able to create these and propagate them and even sell them. So that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. Hopefully a helpful episode about variegation. If you stay tuned about the chimeras, because there's some really amazing examples of chimeras that are not about variegation. And yeah, hard to believe how some of these chimeras are created. So variegation. Thank you very much for listening. If you found it interesting, please give it a review on whatever podcast platform you listen to. Okay, now you can go and listen to someone far more professional than me talk about something probably far less interesting than variegation. Thank you very much. Goodbye.